Nathan Carter had faced combat zones, hostile terrain, and life-or-death situations, but he never expected his greatest battle to be fought in his own front yard, against a clipboard-wielding tyrant named Karen. After serving 20 years in the military, Nathan finally retired, looking forward to a peaceful life in the quiet suburbs. He had chosen his home carefully, a charming 2-story house with a wraparound porch, a flagpole standing tall in the yard, and a sturdy wooden swing where he could sip his morning coffee while watching the sunrise. It wasn't just a house, it was his retreat, his sanctuary. Unfortunately, that peace was short-lived. The HOA was notorious for its rigid rules, but Nathan had assumed that as long as he kept his property clean and well-maintained, he wouldn't have any issues. He was wrong. Enter Karen, the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood and HOA president. She took her position far too seriously, treating the community like her personal kingdom. The moment Nathan moved in, she had made it her mission to correct everything about his property. It started small, passive-aggressive letters about his lawn being too natural, despite being freshly mowed, and reminders about the approved mailbox styles. Nathan had ignored the petty notes, thinking she'd eventually move on. But then, one afternoon, she showed up at his doorstep, sunglasses perched on her nose, lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "Mr. Carter," she said, arms crossed, "we need to discuss your porch swing." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "My porch swing?" "Yes." Karen pulled out a printed document from her clipboard and held it up like a court summons. According to HOA guidelines, all exterior fixtures must conform to the community's aesthetic. Your swing is not on the approved list. Nathan glanced at the swing, the same one he had installed himself, bolted securely to the porch ceiling. It was a simple, sturdy wooden design, stained to match the house. There was nothing garish or out of place about it. "That's ridiculous," Nathan said flatly. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me? There's nothing wrong with my swing." "Well, the HOA disagrees," she sniffed. "You'll need to remove it by the end of the week, or you'll be fined." Nathan exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. He had dealt with unreasonable authority figures before, but this was something else. "I'm not taking it down," he said simply. Karen's smile was tight and cold. "Then you'll be hearing from us." She turned on her heel and strutted away, leaving Nathan standing there, a storm brewing behind his eyes. It was in that moment that he realized this wasn't just about a swing. It was about control. Karen wanted to make an example out of him, and she wasn't going to stop until she got her way. But if she thought he was just going to roll over and obey, she was about to learn a very harsh lesson. HOA's first power move. Nathan wasn't the type to lose sleep over threats, but something told him Karen wasn't bluffing. He didn't have to wait long to find out just how far she was willing to go. The next morning, as he stepped out onto his porch, he found a bright yellow envelope taped to his front door. With a sigh, he ripped it open. Notice of violation. Violation. Unauthorized exterior modification. Porch swing. Fine, $750. Compliance deadline, 5 days. Nathan let out a short laugh. $750? For a porch swing? He shook his head and crumpled the paper in his fist. Before he could head back inside, a voice rang out. "Mr. Carter, have you received the notice?" Nathan turned to see Karen standing on the sidewalk, that same smug expression plastered on her face. Behind her, 2 HOA board members lingered, pretending to examine a neighbor's flower beds. "Sure did," Nathan said, holding up the crumpled paper. "And I'm not paying it." Karen's eyes flickered with irritation, but she forced a smile. "I don't think you understand. The HOA has strict rules that apply to everyone. If you refuse to comply, further action will be taken." "Yeah, like what?" Karen crossed her arms. "Further fines, a lien on your property if necessary. We take non-compliance very seriously, Mr. Carter." Nathan stepped down from his porch, closing the distance between them. "Let me ask you something, Karen. Do you even know the law? Because I do. And I don't recall any local ordinance that says I can't have a porch swing." Karen pursed her lips. "The HOA's regulations are binding, Mr. Carter." Nathan smirked. "Not if they're unlawful. You can fine me all you want, but I'm not removing a damn thing." Karen's nostrils flared, but she quickly composed herself. "We'll see about that," she said, turning sharply on her heel and walking away. Nathan watched her go, feeling a flicker of satisfaction. He had stood his ground, but something told him this was just the beginning. And he was right. Later that day, he heard voices outside and peered through the window. A group of men in reflective vests stood on his driveway, one of them holding a clipboard. Nathan stepped outside. "Can I help you?" One of the workers looked up. "We're here to do a property inspection, sir. HOA sent us." Nathan's jaw tightened. "For what?" The worker shrugged. "Your porch swing, apparently. They want to verify it's a structural violation." Nathan folded his arms. "Do you have a warrant?" The worker hesitated. No, sir, but the HOA." "Then you're trespassing," Nathan said flatly. "Get off my property." The man looked back at his crew, then sighed. "All right, boys, let's go." As they packed up, Nathan spotted Karen watching from down the street, phone in hand. She was fuming. She had expected him to back down, to fold under the weight of her authority. But Karen had just made a critical mistake. She had tried to intimidate the wrong man. Nathan wasn't just going to fight back. He was going to make sure she regretted ever picking this battle. The HOA escalates the conflict. Nathan had dealt with plenty of power-hungry people in his time. Officers who let rank go to their heads, bureaucrats who thought paperwork was more important than common sense. But Karen? She was on another level. After shutting down her so-called property inspection, Nathan expected some form of retaliation. What he didn't expect was how quickly she escalated. 2 days later, another yellow envelope arrived. This time, 3 violations were listed. Unauthorized exterior modification, porch swing. $750 fine. Failure to maintain uniform lawn height, $500 fine. Excessive use of garage for non-vehicle purposes, $650 fine. Nathan stared at the list in disbelief. His lawn. He had mowed it 2 days ago. And what the hell did excessive use of garage even mean? That's when he noticed the fine print at the bottom. Failure to comply within 5 days may result in property lien or HOA-mandated corrections. Nathan clenched his jaw. Karen wasn't just playing dirty. She was trying to financially strangle him into submission. Enough. Nathan pulled out his phone and started digging. If the HOA was going to play hardball, so was he. Uncovering the HOA's dirty secrets. Nathan had learned long ago that bullies weren't as powerful as they pretended to be. There was always a weakness, and he was going to find Karen's. That evening, he reached out to some of his neighbors. "You ever had issues with the HOA?" he asked an older gentleman named Frank who had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years. Frank let out a dry laugh. "Son, everyone's had issues with them. Karen's been running the board like a damn dictatorship." Nathan leaned in. "Ever heard of anyone getting these kinds of back-to-back fines?" Frank hesitated. Then, in a lower voice, he said, "Only people who tick Karen off." That got Nathan's attention. "Meaning?" Frank sighed. "Look, the HOA is supposed to operate with community votes, but Karen runs it like her personal fiefdom. The board members don't argue with her because she controls the budget. And those fines? They're selectively enforced. Some folks get hit with them, others magically get warnings instead." Nathan frowned. "You saying she picks favorites?" Frank nodded. "Exactly. And it's not just about rules. Some people, they get exemptions if they happen to be friends with her. Meanwhile, people she doesn't like? They end up drowning in fines until they either move out or comply." Nathan's gut tightened. This wasn't just an overbearing HOA. This was outright corruption. "How does she get away with it?" he asked. Frank gave him a knowing look. "Ever wonder where all that fine money goes?" Nathan felt a spark of understanding. He had seen this kind of scheme before, money moving through unofficial channels, a lack of proper oversight. Karen wasn't just power-tripping, she was running a racket. And now he had a new mission. The counterattack begins. Nathan spent the next day gathering evidence. He started with the HOA's bylaws. Karen might think she was untouchable, but rules worked both ways. As he combed through the documents, something caught his eye. A clause stating that all fines had to be properly documented, with receipts and records made available to HOA members upon request. So Nathan made a request. And that's when things got interesting. Karen, ever the control freak, didn't take kindly to being questioned. She brushed off his request with a vague, "All financial records are managed internally." Nathan wasn't buying it. If Karen was as squeaky clean as she pretended, she should have no problem providing the records. Instead, she doubled down. The next morning, a tow truck rolled up in front of Nathan's house. A worker stepped out and pointed at his driveway. "We're here for the truck." Nathan's heart pounded as he stormed outside. "Excuse me?" The man checked his clipboard. "This vehicle has been deemed non-compliant under HOA regulations." Nathan's fingers curled into fists. Non-compliant how? The guy hesitated. Says here it's been parked too long without movement. Nathan barked a laugh. I drive that truck every damn day. That's when he saw her, Karen, standing at a distance, pretending to check her mailbox, but very clearly watching. Nathan turned back to the tow truck driver. You got a city order for this tow? The man shifted uncomfortably. No, just the HOA directive. Then get the hell off my property. The driver glanced at his partner, then shrugged. All right, man, no problem. We don't want trouble. They packed up and left. Nathan watched them go before turning his gaze to Karen. She was still standing there, staring, her smug expression starting to slip. Nathan smirked. Oh, Karen, he muttered under his breath. You just messed up big time. Because now this wasn't just about a porch swing. This was war. The HOA oversteps and the protagonist strikes back. Karen had been playing dirty from the start, but the attempted illegal tow was a step too far. Nathan had been patient. He had tried to push back within reason. Now, it was time to put an end to this power trip. Karen takes things too far. The next morning, Nathan woke up to a gut-punch surprise. His water had been shut off. He turned the faucet. Nothing. He checked the shower. Bone dry. Nathan's anger simmered to a slow, lethal boil. He knew it wasn't a city issue. His neighbors still had running water. That left one possibility, Karen. Stepping outside, he wasn't surprised to find her standing at the end of the street, arms crossed, watching. Karen, Nathan called out, striding toward her. What the hell did you do? She didn't even blink. Mr. Carter, due to noncompliance with HOA regulations and failure to pay outstanding fines, your property has been placed under restricted utilities. If you'd like your water restored, I suggest you settle your balance. Nathan stared at her. Are you out of your damn mind? Karen feigned an innocent expression. Rules are rules, Mr. Carter. If you want to live here, you have to follow them. Nathan took a deep breath. He had seen some ruthless people in his time, but Karen? She had just committed an actual crime. HOAs had zero authority to shut off utilities. That was city-level jurisdiction. And now he had her exactly where he wanted her. Nathan strikes back. Nathan turned on his heel and walked straight back into his house. He wasn't about to argue with a petty tyrant. He was about to end her. First, he dialed the city's utilities department. Hi, I need to report an unauthorized utility shutoff at my residence, he said calmly. It wasn't done by the city, it was done by my HOA. The woman on the other end went silent. Then, sir, that's highly illegal. Can you confirm your address? Nathan gave her the information, and within minutes, a city investigator was dispatched. But Nathan wasn't done. He pulled up the HOA's financials, the same ones Karen had refused to provide earlier. What he found made his blood run cold. Thousands of dollars in miscellaneous fees, with no recorded destinations. HOA fines that disappeared from official records once paid. And most damning of all, a direct transfer from the HOA's account to Karen's personal bank account. Nathan's hands tightened into fists. He had her. He had her dead to rights. The public exposure. By the time the city investigator arrived, a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors peeked from their porches, whispering to each other. Word had spread fast. Nathan had proof of Karen's illegal schemes. The city investigator wasted no time. She marched straight to Karen's house and knocked on her door. Karen answered, looking bored, until she saw the investigator's badge. This is a formal inquiry into an unauthorized utility shutoff, the investigator announced. We need to see the HOA's official records regarding this action. Karen's face drained of color. I don't have those records on hand, but... Nathan, standing behind the investigator, held up his phone. Don't worry, Karen, he said smoothly. I have all the records right here. Karen spun on him, furious. You have no right to. Oh, I do, Nathan cut in. And while we're at it, I also have proof that you've been pocketing HOA money. Pretty sure the authorities will be interested in that, too. Gasps erupted from the neighbors. Someone started recording. Karen's mask finally cracked. This is slander, she screeched. I've done nothing wrong. Nathan smirked. Then you won't mind a full audit, right? The investigator's eyes sharpened. Mr. Carter, would you be willing to submit your evidence formally? Nathan didn't even hesitate. Absolutely. Karen's world starts to collapse. As the investigator took notes, Nathan's final move came into play. He turned to the watching crowd and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. If you've ever been fined unfairly by the HOA, now's the time to come forward. A moment of silence. Then, "I got fined for painting my door the wrong shade of blue," someone shouted. "They made me pay for violating noise restrictions for my kid's birthday party," another neighbor said. "She doubled my HOA fees last year with no explanation." The floodgates opened. One by one, people started telling their stories. And as they did, Karen's power crumbled before her eyes. She tried to speak, but no one was listening anymore. Nathan turned back to her, voice calm but firm. "Karen, you messed with the wrong person." Karen's final, desperate move. Karen was cornered, and she knew it. But like any tyrant facing their downfall, she wasn't going down without a fight. Nathan expected her to back off, maybe try to clean up the mess before the city could come down on her. Instead, she did something completely insane. She called the police. The call that backfired. Nathan was sitting on his porch, sipping coffee, when he saw the flashing red and blue lights roll into the neighborhood. 2 officers stepped out, their eyes scanning the gathered crowd. Karen practically sprinted toward them, waving her arms. "Officers, I need your help. That man," she jabbed a finger at Nathan, "has been harassing me, threatening me, and illegally interfering with HOA business." Nathan almost laughed out loud. She was actually trying to flip the script. One of the officers turned to him. "Sir, is this true?" Nathan stood up, calm as ever. "Nope. In fact, I'm the one who called the city about her illegal activity." The officers exchanged glances. "Illegal activity?" Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out a printed copy of the HOA's fraudulent transactions. The same ones that linked Karen to thousands of dollars in missing funds. She's been stealing money from HOA members and shutting off utilities without city authorization. That's why the city's investigating her right now. The officers stiffened. One of them turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, is this true?" Karen's face twisted in rage. That's irrelevant. He's the problem. He's been." The officer held up a hand. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to calm down." Nathan leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed. "If she really believes I'm harassing her, she's free to file a complaint. But first, maybe ask her why she's sneaking around people's homes in the middle of the night." Karen's face froze. The crowd started murmuring. That's when Nathan pulled out his final weapon, his security camera footage. Karen gets caught red-handed. Nathan turned his phone screen toward the officers. "This is from my security cameras 2 nights ago. See that?" The footage showed Karen creeping onto Nathan's porch, clipboard in hand. She walked up to his swing, measuring it with a tape measure, then writing something down. Then, she reached into her purse, pulled out a screwdriver, and started loosening one of the swing's bolts. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Karen's face went sheet white. One of the officers sighed deeply. "Ma'am, were you trespassing on this man's property?" I was conducting an inspection," she sputtered. "HOA business." The officer didn't look impressed. "That's called trespassing and attempted property damage." Karen whipped toward Nathan. "You set me up." "You." Nathan just smiled. "No, Karen. You set yourself up." "The arrest." The officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to turn around." Karen screeched. "You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president. I have rights." "You do," the officer said flatly. "And one of those rights is to remain silent." Click. The cuffs snapped shut. The entire neighborhood erupted in applause. Karen struggled, flailed, screamed, but it was over. The officers guided her to the squad car as she yelled about lawsuits and calling her lawyer. But Nathan knew the truth. Karen wasn't going to be suing anyone. She was going to be fighting to stay out of jail. And she was going to lose. HOA crumbles and Karen's downfall. Karen's arrest sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. For years, she had terrorized residents, weaponizing HOA rules to exert control. But now she was sitting in the back of a squad car, screaming at anyone who would listen. Nathan stood at the edge of his porch, arms crossed, watching the show unfold. Justice had finally arrived. But the fallout was just beginning. The HOA board implodes. With Karen out of the picture, the remaining HOA board members panicked. Some had been complicit in her corruption. Others had simply been too scared to stand up to her. Either way, her downfall meant they were next. The city investigator wasted no time. Armed with Nathan's evidence, they dug deep into the HOA's financial records. What they found was worse than anyone expected. Over $50,000 in unaccounted fees. Falsified citations against certain homeowners. Karen using HOA funds for personal expenses, including a luxury vacation and a new car. It was a complete disaster for the HOA. At an emergency meeting, the remaining board members had no choice but to resign. One of them, a nervous-looking man named Richard, stood before the gathered crowd. We had no idea how bad things were, he stammered. Karen handled all the finances. A neighbor cut him off. You let her do it, and you helped her go after people like Nathan. Richard swallowed hard. We were stepping down. Effective immediately. And just like that, the HOA crumbled. Karen loses everything. With the HOA under investigation and her name plastered across local news, Karen's life fell apart in record time. Her bank accounts were frozen as investigators traced the missing money. Her home was seized to pay off the HOA's legal penalties. And worst of all, she was banned from ever serving on an HOA board again. Nathan couldn't help but laugh when he saw the official report. The self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood had been permanently dethroned. But the best part? She had nowhere to go. 1 week later, Nathan watched as a moving truck pulled up to Karen's house. She stood in the driveway, pale and defeated, overseeing the packing of her belongings. She spotted Nathan standing on his porch and glared. Nathan raised his coffee mug in salute. Safe travels, Karen. She looked like she wanted to scream, but she just turned away and climbed into her car. As the moving truck rumbled down the street, the neighborhood cheered. The reign of Karen was officially over. The HOA faces full legal consequences. With Karen gone, the neighborhood finally felt like a community again. No more random fines, no more surveillance from clipboard-wielding tyrants, and no more fear of retaliation for simply existing in their own homes. But Nathan wasn't done. Karen may have been the ringleader, but the entire HOA system had enabled her. And he was going to make sure they paid the price. The legal storm begins. After reviewing all the evidence Nathan had gathered, the city officially fined the HOA for years of illegal enforcement. The total amount? $250,000 in penalties. With no leadership and no money, the HOA was officially dissolved. For the first time in years, homeowners weren't required to pay monthly dues. No more restrictions, no more arbitrary rules. Just people living their lives without fear. But Nathan wasn't done yet. He rallied the neighbors who had been victims of Karen's reign and connected them with a lawyer willing to file a class action lawsuit. The case exploded. Dozens of homeowners stepped forward, detailing their experiences: unlawful fines, threats, false liens, and financial losses. The more people spoke up, the clearer it became. Karen and her cronies had been running a full-scale extortion operation. With overwhelming evidence, the judge ruled in favor of the homeowners. The HOA, or what was left of it, was forced to repay thousands in damages to every homeowner who had been affected. And as for the former HOA board members, at least 2 of them faced charges for misappropriation of funds. Justice had been served. Nathan's final power move. The victory was sweet, but Nathan had one last thing to do. At the final court hearing, he stood outside the courthouse waiting. And then he saw her. Karen, disheveled, exhausted, and completely broken. Her reputation was ruined. She was financially devastated. Nathan simply smiled. She met his gaze, eyes burning with humiliation, but she didn't say a word. She knew. She had picked a fight with the wrong person. And she had lost everything. As Karen slinked away, Nathan took a deep breath, finally feeling the weight lift off his shoulders. The battle was over. And he had won. Karen's personal downfall. The HOA was gone. The lawsuit had been settled. The neighborhood was free. But Karen's story wasn't over yet. With her finances destroyed, her reputation in ruins, and her home seized, she had been forced to move out of the neighborhood she once ruled with an iron fist. Nathan had almost forgotten about her, until he saw the news. One evening, as he was scrolling through local updates, a headline caught his eye. Disgraced HOA President Karen Thompson takes new job at another HOA. Nathan nearly spit out his coffee. He clicked the article, and sure enough, Karen had weaseled her way into another homeowners association in a town an hour away. But there was one key difference this time. She wasn't the president. She was a low-level admin assistant. From queen to nobody. Karen, the once all-powerful ruler of the neighborhood, had been reduced to handling paperwork for a board that barely even acknowledged her existence. No more fines. No more power trips. No more dictatorship. She was nothing now. Nathan couldn't help but chuckle. Poetic justice. Final humiliation. A few weeks later, Nathan ran into one of his former neighbors, an older woman named Mrs. Jensen. She grinned. "You'll never believe what I heard." Nathan smirked. Try me. Mrs. Jensen leaned in. Karen got fired from her new HOA job. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Already? Mrs. Jensen nodded. Apparently, she tried to pull the same stunts, issuing unauthorized fines and reminding people about rules that didn't exist. But the actual HOA president wasn't having it. Nathan burst out laughing. Let me guess, she tried to seize control? Yep. And they showed her the door real quick. Nathan shook his head. Karen would never change. But now, she had no power left. No influence. No authority. She had fallen as low as she possibly could. And the best part, it was all her own fault. Epilogue and final mic drop. The neighborhood had changed. Without the constant threat of fines and petty rules, people actually started to enjoy their homes again. Yards were decorated the way families wanted. Kids played freely in the cul-de-sac, and best of all, Nathan's porch swing was still hanging, right where it belonged. One crisp Saturday morning, he sat on it with his coffee, rocking gently as the sun rose. It was peaceful, the way it should have been all along. Then a voice called out from the sidewalk. "Morning, Nathan." He looked up to see Frank, the older neighbor who had warned him about Karen in the first place. He was holding a piece of paper, a smirk on his face. Nathan took it and glanced down. It was a mock violation notice. Violation, excessive enjoyment of porch swing. Fine, 1 cup of coffee. Nathan burst out laughing. He tipped his coffee mug toward Frank. "You really went all out on this one." Frank chuckled. "Figured you might miss all the drama." Nathan shook his head. "Not a chance." He took another sip, watching the peaceful, HOA-free neighborhood. Karen was gone. The HOA was dismantled. And the neighborhood? Better than ever. Nathan leaned back, letting the swing sway, a victorious smirk on his face. Some fights weren't worth it. But this one absolutely was.